Everyone laughed when a bankrupt millionaire adopted a homeless girl who worked just to eat. He's shocked when he realizes she's a genius. Before we jump in, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know. The 52nd floor had once felt like the top of the world to James Reynolds. Now, as he gazed out over the Chicago skyline from his modest apartment window, it seemed like a cruel reminder of how far he had fallen. The twinkling lights of downtown financial buildings, one of which had once borne his name, now mocked him with their distant brilliance. James swirled the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler, the last of his collection of fine whiskeys. Everything else was gone. The mansions, the cars, the yacht, the respect. All vanished in 6 devastating weeks when Victor Blackwood, his business partner of 3 decades and supposedly his best friend, had orchestrated the most elegant financial betrayal in recent memory. To empire builders, James whispered bitterly to the empty room, raising his glass in a mocking toast before taking a deep swallow, welcoming the familiar burn. The doctor's words from that morning echoed in his mind. Your blood pressure is dangerously high, Mr. Reynolds. The stress is killing you. James laughed humorlessly. Of course it was. Watching 30 years of work dissolve overnight would stress anyone to the breaking point. The nightmares had been relentless, standing in the boardroom as shares plummeted, watching helplessly as Blackwood transferred billions to offshore accounts, the pitying glances from former employees as security escorted him from the building. James Reynolds, the financial genius who had built Reynolds Financial Group from nothing, reduced to a cautionary tale. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass, his reflection revealing a man he barely recognized. At 58, his once commanding presence had withered. Deep lines carved paths from his eyes to his jawline. His tailored suits hung in the closet, replaced by a worn sweater and slacks that better suited his new station. What legacy did I actually leave? He asked himself, voice breaking in the silence of his apartment. Numbers on a screen? Buildings with my name that will be rebranded within a year? What was it all for? The distant wail of a siren drew his attention to the streets below, where tiny figures hurried through the first snow of the season. Real people with real lives, while he had lived in abstractions, market projections, asset valuations, risk, assessments. He had been so certain of his impact on the world. James drained the last of his whiskey, set down the empty glass, and made a decision. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow he would step outside these walls that had become both refuge and prison. Tomorrow he would remember what it meant to live in the real world again, not in the rarefied air where fortunes were made and lost with keystrokes. Little did James Reynolds know that tomorrow would change everything in ways he could never have calculated. The morning greeted Chicago with a relentless downpour that transformed the city streets into rushing rivers of gray. James pulled his worn coat tighter as he walked without purpose, letting the rain mask the tears he'd denied himself. For weeks, his doctor would be pleased. He was, at least outside. He almost missed her, a small huddled figure beneath the awning of what had once been a bookstore. The child couldn't have been more than 8, sitting cross-legged on a piece of cardboard that did little to protect her from the damp chill. Before her lay an array of delicate paper creations, origami animals crafted with surprising intricacy. James would have continued walking, as did everyone else hurrying past, had the girl not looked up at that precise moment. Their eyes met and he froze. Hers were startlingly alert, possessing a depth that seemed impossible in one so young. Intelligent, wary, and impossibly old. Would you like to buy one, sir? Her voice was clear and steady, no trace of the pleading wine street vendors often affected. They're $1 each, but they'll last forever if you keep them dry. James found himself kneeling to examine her work. Did you make these yourself? Yes, sir. The swan is the hardest, but the fox is my favorite. He picked up a small paper fox, marveling at the precision of its folds. My name is James. What's yours? Sophia, she answered, her small fingers arranging her wares with businesslike efficiency. Where are your parents, Sophia? The girl's hands stilled momentarily. My grandmother is in the hospital. I'm taking care of things until she gets better. James noticed two men across the street watching them with unsettling interest. Something protective stirred within him, an unfamiliar sensation after years of corporate detachment. How much for your entire inventory? He asked suddenly. Sophia's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with childlike calculation. $23. I have 23 pieces today. He reached for his wallet, finding two $20 bills. Keep the change. You must be hungry. Would you like something to eat? Her hesitation lasted only seconds before she nodded, gathering her few belongings into a threadbare backpack with practiced movements. They walked to a nearby diner, and James watched in silent concern as Sophia devoured a sandwich as if unsure when she might eat again. While she ate, she absently scribbled on a napkin. Glancing over, James was startled to see not childish doodles but complex mathematical equations, formulations that even with his financial background he could barely comprehend. "What are you working on there?" he asked casually. Sophia quickly covered the napkin with her hand. "Just numbers. They help me think." In that moment, looking at this small girl with extraordinary abilities living on the edge of survival, something shifted in James Reynolds' broken heart. The world had more to offer than his self-pity, and perhaps, just perhaps, he had more to offer the world than he'd believed. As evening approached, James faced a dilemma he never expected. The rain had intensified, and Sophia had nowhere safe to go. "I have an extra room," he found himself saying, surprising himself as much as the girl. "It's just my office, but there's a sofa that converts to a bed." Sophia studied him with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. "Why would you help me? Most people just walk by." A fair question, one James wasn't entirely sure he could answer. "Maybe because I know what it's like when the world walks by." That night, he improvised a bedroom in his home office, clearing financial documents from the pull-out couch. Sophia fell asleep almost instantly, clutching her backpack as if it might disappear. James stood in the doorway, watching the steady rise and fall of her small chest, overwhelmed by the strange turn his life had taken. The next morning, he called Rebecca Harper, a social worker who had frequently criticized his company's cold corporate policies during community board meetings. She arrived skeptical but softened upon meeting Sophia. "You understand this is highly irregular," Rebecca said as they spoke in hushed tones in the kitchen. "I should be placing her in emergency foster care immediately." "She needs stability," James argued. "Her grandmother's in the hospital. This could be temporary." Rebecca's eyebrows rose. James Reynolds arguing for compassion over procedure? I never thought I'd see the day. When she interviewed Sophia alone, the girl was forthright about her situation. Her grandmother had suffered a stroke 3 weeks ago. With no other family, Sophia had been surviving on her own, rather than risk foster care. "She's extraordinary," Rebecca admitted afterward. "But the system has protocols." "The system failed her," James countered. "I'm requesting temporary guardianship while we locate her grandmother and assess the situation." 2 days later, they appeared before family court Judge Michaels, a man James recognized from charity functions in his previous life. The judge's surprise at seeing the former financial titan in his courtroom was evident. "Mr. Reynolds, you're requesting temporary guardianship of a minor with whom you have no prior relationship?" "Yes, Your Honor. And what qualifies you for this responsibility? Your recent circumstances are well documented." James felt Sophia's small hand slip into his. The gesture, so simple and trusting, crystallized something in him. "Your Honor, I would like to amend my petition," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in months. "I'm seeking to adopt Sophia permanently." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Rebecca's clipboard clattered to the floor. Judge Michaels leaned forward, genuine confusion crossing his features. "Mr. Reynolds, this is highly irregular. What could a man who's lost everything possibly offer this child?" James looked down at Sophia, then back at the judge. "A second chance, Your Honor. For both of us." As they left the courthouse with temporary approval pending home studies and background checks, Sophia looked up at him. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," James replied, suddenly terrified and exhilarated by the path he'd chosen. "But sometimes The decisions we don't plan are the ones that save us. The first weeks of their unlikely arrangement tested both James and Sophia in ways neither had anticipated. For a man accustomed to directing teams of financial analysts and having meals prepared by private chefs, the mundane challenges of parenthood proved humbling. "What exactly constitutes a balanced breakfast?" James muttered one morning, staring helplessly into his nearly empty refrigerator. Sophia silently appeared at his side, gently taking the carton of eggs from his hands. "I can make scrambled eggs," she offered. "Grandma taught me before she got sick." James watched as this tiny girl confidently cracked eggs into a bowl, her movements precise and practiced. His chest tightened with a mixture of admiration and sadness. "You shouldn't have to cook for yourself," he said softly. "That's my job, now." Sophia shrugged. "We all do what we need to do." The wisdom in her words, far beyond her 8 years, struck him deeply. That afternoon he enrolled in a basic cooking class and ordered groceries to be delivered weekly. School presented another challenge. After assessment tests that left administrators wide-eyed, Sophia was placed 2 grades ahead, yet still appeared bored with the curriculum. When the phone rang during James's first attempt at making lasagna, he was greeted by a stern voice. "Mr. Reynolds, this is Mrs. Winters, Sophia's math teacher. We need to discuss your daughter's behavior immediately." James felt a flash of protective anger he hadn't known himself capable of. "What seems to be the problem?" "She publicly corrected my solutions during class and suggested an entirely different approach to solving the equations. It was quite disruptive." That evening, after a tense parent-teacher conference, James sat with Sophia on the living room floor, surrounded by her math workbooks. "You can't just tell teachers they're wrong, Sophia." She looked down, fingers tracing patterns on the carpet. "But the method she was teaching would take 14 additional steps for complex problems. I showed a way that's more efficient." James examined her workbook, finding her method not just correct but elegant in its simplicity. "You're right," he admitted. "But sometimes, being right isn't enough. We need to find a better way for you to share your ideas." Nights brought their own difficulties. James would wake to heart-wrenching cries echoing through the apartment, finding Sophia tangled in sheets, fighting invisible demons. The first time he froze in the doorway, completely unprepared. By the third night he had learned to sit quietly beside her bed, his presence gradually calming her back to sleep. One morning, while changing the sheets, he discovered small hoards of food hidden beneath her mattress: crackers, cereal bars, apples, carefully wrapped and preserved. "I'm not going to let you go hungry," he promised when he gently confronted her about the hiding places. "There will always be food here." Sophia nodded, but the next week he found new caches in different locations. Trust, he realized, couldn't be built with mere words. The apartment slowly transformed. James cleared investment journals from bookshelves to make room for children's literature and advanced mathematics texts. A corner of the living room became devoted to art supplies for Sophia's origami. The refrigerator door, once pristinely bare, now displayed school papers marked with bright red A's. 6 weeks into their new life, James received another call from school. This time it was the principal. "Mr. Reynolds, we need to discuss Sophia's placement. Our educational psychologist has evaluated her work and, well, frankly, we've never seen someone with her mathematical abilities." That afternoon, surrounded by educators and specialists, James listened as they explained what he had already begun to suspect. "She doesn't just understand mathematics," explained Dr. Harrison, pushing his glasses up his nose. "She sees patterns and connections that most mathematicians spend lifetimes trying to comprehend. She's not being difficult when she corrects her teachers. She simply sees more efficient paths that others miss." On the drive home, Sophia sat quietly in the back seat, her small legs swinging nervously. "Am I in trouble?" she finally asked. James caught her eye in the rearview mirror. "No, Sophia. You're extraordinary. We just need to figure out the right way to nurture that brilliance." That night, after tucking her in, James leaned against the closed bedroom door, overwhelmed by the responsibility he'd taken on. He had once managed billions of dollars and thousands of employees, yet nothing had prepared him for guiding this remarkable child whose mind operated on a different plane. It wasn't just about providing food and shelter anymore. It was about creating a home where a genius could safely grow. The invitation arrived on heavy cream stationery, an unexpected ghost from James's former life. The Chicago Financial Foundation was hosting its annual charity gala, an event he had once chaired. In smaller handwritten script at the bottom, "James, it would mean a lot to see you there. Margaret." Margaret Chen had been one of the few board members who had stood by him, albeit quietly, during his downfall. The gesture touched him more than he expected. "We've been invited to a fancy dinner," he told Sophia over their breakfast of slightly burnt pancakes. She looked up, maple syrup dripping from her fork. "We? I'm not leaving you with a sitter. You're my daughter now." The word still felt new on his tongue, but increasingly right. "Besides, it's time we ventured back into society together." That Saturday, James dusted off his last remaining tailored homme suit while Sophia twirled in a new navy blue dress they'd purchased for the occasion. As their taxi approached the glittering downtown hotel, he felt Sophia's small hand slip into his. "Are you nervous?" she asked, her perception uncanny as always. James managed a small smile. "Terrified." "Me too," she confessed. "But we have each other now." The ballroom fell into a hushed silence when they entered. James Reynolds, once king of this world, now returning as a dethroned monarch with a child from the streets at his side. Whispers followed them like shadows as Margaret approached, embracing James warmly. "I'm so glad you came," she said before, kneeling to Sophia's level. "And this must be the remarkable young lady I've heard about." Dinner proceeded awkwardly but tolerably, until a familiar voice cut through the gentle hum of conversation. "Well, if it isn't the great James Reynolds gracing us with his presence." Victor Blackwood stood at their table, champagne flute in hand, his smile as sharp as broken glass. Though only 3 years younger than James, Blackwood looked a decade, his junior success having preserved rather than aged him. "Victor," James acknowledged, his hand instinctively moving to Sophia's shoulder. "Charity is your new business now, Reynolds?" Blackwood's eyes flicked dismissively to Sophia. "Taking in strays?" James felt his blood pressure spike dangerously, but before he could respond, the conversation around them shifted to a technical discussion of a new financial algorithm Blackwood's company was launching. "Our risk assessment model projects market vulnerabilities with 87% accuracy," Blackwood boasted to the table, "revolutionary in predicting downturns." "Your variable is wrong," came Sophia's clear voice from beside James. The table fell silent. Blackwood's smile froze. "Excuse me?" "Your risk variable," Sophia continued, seemingly oblivious to the tension. "It's underestimated by at least 40%. Your formula doesn't account for compounding factors in extended bear markets." Blackwood's laugh was brittle. "Well, isn't that adorable? Reynolds, you're teaching street urchins finance now?" Several diners chuckled nervously, but Walter Simmons, a veteran hedge fund manager, leaned forward with interest. "Actually, how did you come to that conclusion, young lady?" Sophia reached for a napkin, borrowed a pen, and quickly sketched a series of equations. Simmons studied them, his bushy eyebrows rising steadily. "Remarkable," he muttered. "She's right, Victor. Your model doesn't account for these variables." Blackwood's face flushed crimson. "This is absurd. I won't be lectured by a child." As he stormed away, Sophia's eyes remained fixed on the digital display where Blackwood's presentation still glowed. "Mr. Reynolds," she whispered, "there's something strange about those numbers." Later, as James tucked an exhausted Sophia into bed, he found himself torn between pride and concern. "You were brilliant tonight," he told her. "He wasn't a nice man," Sophia observed sleepily, "and his math was sloppy. But there was something else in those projections. Something hidden." As she drifted off to sleep, James remained sitting at her bedside, unsettled by the evening's events. Victor Blackwood was not a man who forgot or forgave humiliation. In defending Sophia, James had potentially made a powerful enemy even more dangerous. Yet for the first time since his downfall, he had felt something long dormant stirring within him, not just the protective instinct toward Sophia, but a spark of his old analytical fire. There was indeed something odd about Blackwood's presentation, something that didn't quite add up, and no one noticed patterns better than Sophia. "This wall should definitely be blue," Sophia declared, tapping her chin thoughtfully as she surveyed James's home office. "Blue stimulates the brain." 3 months into their life together, James had finally agreed to Sophia's persistent request to transform the apartment. For too long, it had remained a mausoleum to his former life, the stark, impersonal decor of a man whose existence had revolved around boardrooms and balance sheets. "Blue it is," James agreed, rolling up the sleeves of his old Harvard sweatshirt. "And what about your room?" "Yellow," she replied without hesitation. "Like sunshine." The weekend became a whirlwind of paint cans, drop cloths, and furniture rearrangement. James dismantled his imposing mahogany desk, the last relic of his corporate throne. In its place, they assembled a simpler workstation with 2 chairs side by side, one for him, one for Sophia. "We can work together now," she explained, her small face serious. "2 minds are better than one." As James moved his remaining financial texts to make room for Sophia's growing collection of books, he discovered a box he'd forgotten, photographs and mementos he'd packed away during the darkest days of his downfall. Among them, a picture of his parents outside their modest Chicago bakery, taken long before his rise to wealth and prominence. "Is that your mom and dad?" Sophia asked, peering over his shoulder. "Yes. They worked incredibly hard so I could go to college." He ran a finger over their smiling faces. "They never lived to see how high I climbed, or how far I fell." Sophia studied the photograph. "They look kind. I think they'd be happy about us." The simple observation brought unexpected tears to James's eyes. By Sunday evening, the apartment was transformed. Sophia's room glowed with warm yellow walls adorned with mathematical diagrams she'd drawn herself. The living room, once a study in corporate gray, now featured a vibrant blue accent wall and colorful throw pillows. Most importantly, they had converted James's rarely used dining room into a dedicated learning space, with bookshelves lining the walls and a large whiteboard for Sophia's equations. That night, after Sophia had gone to bed, James sat in the newly painted living room, sipping tea instead of whiskey. The apartment no longer felt like a reminder of his failure, but a canvas for something new. For the first time in over a year, he felt genuinely at peace. His contemplation was interrupted by a soft noise from Sophia's room. Quietly opening her door, he found her fast asleep amidst a sea of open books, not children's stories, but university-level texts on advanced mathematics, theoretical physics, and computer science. Her small hand still clutched a pencil, and beside her lay pages filled with complex equations, many of them annotated with her own insights. Carefully, so as not to wake her, James gathered the books. One caught his attention, a graduate-level text on algorithmic finance. In the margins, Sophia had rewritten entire theorems, simplifying and improving upon the published work of seasoned mathematicians. James sat on the edge of her bed, watching his extraordinary daughter sleep, her brilliant mind temporarily at rest. The child who had been selling origami on the street just months ago was casually redefining mathematical principles that had earned others Nobel Prizes. As he gently removed the pencil from her grasp and pulled the covers over her shoulders, an idea began to form in James's mind. His financial empire might have crumbled, but perhaps he had been given a second chance at creating something far more valuable. A legacy not of wealth, but of genuine innovation and human potential. He placed a soft kiss on Sophia's forehead. "Sleep well, my little genius," he whispered. "Tomorrow we begin something remarkable." That night, James Reynolds slept soundly for the first time since his downfall, his dreams no longer haunted by what he had lost, but illuminated by what they might build together. The call from Sophia's school came on a Tuesday afternoon. James answered, immediately concerned. Mr. Reynolds, this is Principal Morales. Don't worry. Sophia isn't in trouble, but we need you to come in as soon as possible. An hour later, James sat in a conference room surrounded by educators whose expressions ranged from awestruck to perplexed. In the center of the table lay Sophia's test results and work samples. We've administered every advanced assessment available, Principal Morales explained, sliding a folder toward James. The results are unprecedented. Dr. Garcia, the district's educational psychologist, leaned forward. Mr. Reynolds, your daughter's cognitive abilities, particularly in mathematics and pattern recognition, register literally off our charts. We had to consult with university specialists to fully evaluate her work. James paged through the report, his heart swelling with pride yet constricting with responsibility. Numbers and percentages told the extraordinary story of Sophia's mind. She's not just gifted, Dr. Garcia continued. She's possibly one of the most brilliant mathematical minds of her generation. The way she approaches problems is revolutionary. She doesn't simply solve equations, she reimagines entire systems. Principal, Morales clasped her hands. Mr. Reynolds, we're not equipped to provide the education Sophia needs. We'd like to discuss specialized programs, perhaps university-level coursework. James nodded, overwhelmed. Thank you. I'll need time to consider our options. Returning home, he found Sophia at the kitchen table, homework long finished, now deeply engaged in an advanced calculus textbook. How was your meeting? She asked without looking up. Enlightening, he replied carefully. Sophia, why didn't you tell me how advanced your mathematical abilities really are? She shrugged, suddenly looking every bit the 8-year-old she was. I didn't want to be different, not more than I already am. Being different isn't a bad thing, James said gently. It was on the streets. Her voice grew quiet. Standing out gets you noticed. Getting noticed isn't always safe. A protective ache tightened James's chest. You're safe now, and your mind is a gift, not something to hide. After dinner, while Sophia was showering, James's curiosity led him to her room. With newfound understanding, he searched for clues to the full extent of her abilities. Under her bed, he discovered a cache of notebooks filled with equations, algorithms, and theoretical models far beyond anything he'd expected. One notebook particularly caught his attention, dated entries chronicling mathematical patterns Sophia had observed while living on the streets. She had developed complex formulas predicting pedestrian traffic flow at different times of day, weather conditions that optimized sales, and even algorithms calculating the most efficient locations for selling her origami. What had seemed like a child's desperate survival had actually been a genius applying advanced mathematics to the harsh realities of street life. When Sophia emerged in her pajamas, she found James sitting on her bed, notebooks spread around him. You weren't supposed to see those, she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. Sophia, James said, his voice thick with emotion. These are extraordinary. They're just numbers, she said, eyes downcast. Just ways to make sense of things. James held up a notebook containing pedestrian traffic patterns. This isn't just numbers, this is brilliant applied mathematics. You weren't just surviving by chance. She sat beside him, small fingers tracing the equations she'd created. People are predictable if you watch long enough. I calculated when the most generous people would pass by, which corners had optimal visibility but minimal police presence, which times had the highest foot traffic but lowest vendor competition. You created predictive models that Fortune 500 companies would pay millions for, and you did it to sell paper foxes. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. The Fox algorithm was particularly effective. James wrapped an arm around her shoulders. All this time I thought I was rescuing you, but your mind was already saving you in ways I couldn't have imagined. That night, long after Sophia had fallen asleep, James sat in their newly painted living room, a remarkable realization dawning. In the midst of losing everything he once valued, he had gained something priceless, not just a daughter to love, but a mind that might change the world. The true treasure, he now understood, had been hiding in plain sight all along, selling Origami on a rainy Chicago street corner. Unable to sleep, James wandered through the quiet apartment, his mind racing with possibilities for Sophia's education. From the hallway, he noticed a blue light spilling from beneath the door of their shared workspace. He hesitated, then gently pushed the door open. Sophia sat hunched over his old computer, her small face illuminated by the screen's glow. Lines of code scrolled rapidly as her fingers danced across the keyboard with practiced precision. "It's past midnight," James said softly, causing her to jump. I couldn't sleep," she stammered, moving to close the program. "Wait." James approached, resting a hand on her shoulder. "What are you working on?" Sophia bit her lip, conflicted, then sighed. "I've been analyzing something. I wasn't sure if I should tell you." James pulled up a chair beside her. On the screen, complex financial data flowed through what appeared to be a sophisticated analysis program. "Where did you get this data?" he asked, recognizing fragments of trading patterns. "From public records of Reynolds Financial," she explained. "I've been studying the collapse." James felt his chest tighten. "Why?" "Because it didn't make sense." Her serious eyes met his. The mathematics wasn't logical. She pointed to the screen, where colorful visualization graphs displayed trading patterns from the months before his company's implosion. "See these patterns? They're not random market fluctuations. They're deliberate." Her finger traced a series of subtle anomalies. "Someone created an algorithm designed to trigger cascading failures in your company's risk management systems." James leaned closer, his financial expertise awakening after months of dormancy. What initially looked like market chaos now revealed itself as something more sinister. Digital footprints of sabotage. "Blackwood," he whispered. Sophia nodded. "I think so, but that's not all." She clicked to another screen showing encrypted transactions. "I've been developing an algorithm to track hidden money flows. These transactions don't make sense unless..." "Unless what?" "Unless they were never meant to disappear completely." Her voice grew excited. "Mr. Reynolds' dad, I think most of the money isn't gone, it's hidden, waiting." James stared at the screen, decades of financial expertise allowing him to see what Sophia had discovered. His downfall hadn't been a simple embezzlement scheme. It was an elaborate shell game designed to make assets vanish temporarily, only to reappear when all investigations had concluded. "Blackwood didn't just steal the money," James said slowly. "He created a timed reemergence strategy." "Exactly." Sophia's eyes shone with the thrill of the intellectual challenge. "The algorithms are set to reconsolidate the assets in approximately 18 months, enough time for all investigations to close and attention to shift elsewhere." James ran a hand through his hair, mind racing. "How did you figure this out?" "I noticed discrepancies in the collapsed asset valuations. The mathematics didn't balance." She shrugged as if it were obvious. "Numbers always have to balance." "And you created this tracking program yourself?" She nodded. "I've been working on it at night. It still needs refinement, but it's already identified several hidden transaction pathways." James stared at his 8-year-old daughter with a mixture of awe and growing determination. The universe had a strange sense of irony. His financial empire had been destroyed by one mathematical mind, only to potentially be reclaimed by another. "Sophia," he said carefully, "this is dangerous information. If Blackwood realized what you've discovered..." "I know." Her voice was small but resolute. "But isn't truth important?" "You taught me that." James looked at the screen again, seeing not just the technical brilliance of Sophia's discovery but its moral significance. This wasn't just about reclaiming wealth. It was about justice for thousands of employees and investors who had lost everything. "We'll need help," he said finally, "and we'll need to be extremely careful." Sophia's face broke into a tentative smile. "So we're going to do something about it?" James nodded, a forgotten fire rekindling in his soul. "Yes, together." As dawn broke over Chicago, father and daughter remained huddled before the computer, their shadows stretched long across the room. Two minds united by mathematics, justice, and the unexpected bond that had transformed them both. A familiar electricity filled the air in the Reynolds apartment. The storage closet, once filled with forgotten financial memorabilia, had been transformed into a makeshift operations center. 3 large whiteboards lined the walls covered with complex diagrams, timelines, and code segments. A secured server hummed in the corner, running Sophia's tracking algorithms day and night. They had given their mission a name: Project Phoenix. Like the mythical bird, they aimed to resurrect justice from the ashes of deception. "We need more processing power," Sophia announced one morning, her hair twisted into messy braids as she studied the latest algorithm outputs. "The pattern recognition module keeps overloading when tracking the offshore transfers." James nodded, making a note. "I'll see what I can arrange. But we also need human insight, someone who understands the technical infrastructure Blackwood uses." That afternoon, while Sophia attended her newly arranged university-level mathematics course, James visited a small technology consulting firm in downtown Chicago. Sarah Lawson had been the lead systems architect at Reynolds Financial before the collapse. Unlike many executives, she had refused Victor Blackwood's generous offer to join his new venture. "James Reynolds," she said, rising from behind her modest desk. "I never expected to see you again." "Hello, Sarah," he replied, noting the wariness in her eyes. "I need your expertise, off the record." Sarah's office blinds were drawn as James carefully explained what Sophia had discovered. He omitted certain details, including the full extent of his daughter's genius, but shared enough to convey the gravity of their findings. So an 8-year-old girl decoded what teams of federal investigators couldn't? Sarah looked skeptical. "She sees patterns others miss," James said simply. "But we need someone who understands the systems from the inside." Sarah studied the data samples he'd brought. Her expression shifted from doubt to focused concentration. "These transaction signatures," she murmured. "They're using a modified version of the security protocol I developed before I left." She looked up sharply. "I always thought the collapse was too clean, too complete. Blackwood isn't just brilliant, he's meticulous. He would never leave loose ends." "Unless the loose ends were part of the design," James suggested. "A perfect crime with a delayed completion." By evening, Sarah had agreed to join Project Phoenix, bringing critical technical expertise and, just as importantly, a passionate desire for justice. The team now comprised 3: James with his financial acumen, Sarah with her systems knowledge, and Sophia with her extraordinary mathematical insight. Days turned into weeks as they worked to unravel Blackwood's scheme. The apartment buzzed with purpose. James found himself energized in a way that even his most successful business days hadn't matched. This wasn't about wealth accumulation, it was about righting a profound wrong. One night, as they sorted through newly discovered transaction pathways, Sophia suddenly grew quiet. "What is it?" James asked, recognizing her pensive expression. "If we succeed," she said slowly, "what happens to all those people who lost everything?" James paused, considering her question carefully. In his focused pursuit of exposing Blackwood, he hadn't fully contemplated the aftermath. "Ideally, assets would be returned to investors and former employees," he explained. "But the legal process would be complex." Sophia's fingers tapped a rhythmic pattern on the table, something she often did while thinking deeply. "What if we could do more than just expose the fraud?" she suggested. "What if we could create a system that prevents this from happening to others?" Sarah looked up from her computer. "What are you thinking, Sophia?" "The algorithm I'm developing doesn't just track hidden assets," she explained, excitement building in her voice. "It identifies the mathematical signatures of fraudulent transactions before they can cause systemic damage. With refinement, it could become a financial immune system." James and Sarah exchanged glances, recognizing the potential magnitude of what Sophia was proposing. "That would transform financial security globally," Sarah said. "But Blackwood won't go down without a fight. If he realizes what we're doing, he'll try to stop us," James finished grimly, "which is why we need to be prepared for every contingency." That Night, they established rigorous security protocols. All digital communications were encrypted. Physical evidence was stored in multiple secure locations. Most importantly, they developed emergency separation procedures in case they were discovered. As James tucked Sophia into bed, later than usual due to their intensive work, he felt a mixture of pride and concern. "Are you sure you want to continue with this?" he asked softly. "It's not too late to step back and let the authorities handle it." Sophia looked up at him, her young face solemn. "The streets taught me something important," she said. "Justice doesn't just happen. People make it happen." She squeezed his hand. "We can make it happen." James felt a surge of emotion. In less than a year, his life had transformed from despair to purpose, from isolation to family. Whatever dangers lay ahead, they would face them together. As he closed her bedroom door, his phone vibrated with a text from Rebecca Harper, the social worker who had helped with Sophia's adoption. "Need to discuss urgent matter regarding S. Can we meet tomorrow?" James frowned at the unexpected message. Throughout their operation, they had maintained normal appearances. Rebecca's regular visits had continued without incident. What urgent matter could have arisen? Little did he know that Project Phoenix was about to face its first serious threat. The cafe James chose for his meeting with Rebecca Harper overlooked Millennium Park, offering both privacy and public safety. He arrived early, selecting a corner table with a clear view of all entrances, a precaution that had become second nature since beginning Project Phoenix. Rebecca arrived precisely on time, her usual professional composure slightly frayed. Her hair was pulled back severely, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, settling into her chair and declining a menu. "How's Sophia adjusting to her advanced coursework?" James maintained a pleasant expression, while mentally noting Rebecca's unusual direct inquiry about Sophia's academic specifics, information he had deliberately kept vague in their regular reports. "She's thriving," he replied carefully. "What's this urgent matter you mentioned?" Rebecca's fingers tapped nervously on her coffee cup. "I've received some concerns about Sophia's living environment. Apparently there are questions about unusual activities in your home." A chill ran through James. "What kind of activities?" "Electronic equipment, irregular hours, frequent visitor, a Ms. Lawson." Rebecca leaned forward. "James, if you're involved in something that could jeopardize Sophia's well-being, our home life is perfectly appropriate," James interrupted firmly. "Sarah Lawson is tutoring Sophia in computer science. The equipment is for her education." Rebecca studied him for a long moment. "I believe you, but I need to conduct an unscheduled home visit. Today, if possible." Something in her tone triggered James's internal alarms, honed through decades of high-stakes negotiations. Rebecca's request wasn't standard protocol, especially for a case that had been proceeding smoothly for months. "Of course," he agreed pleasantly. "But I'll need to clear my afternoon schedule. Would tomorrow morning work instead?" Looking relieved, Rebecca nodded. "First thing tomorrow." As they parted ways, James immediately called Sarah. "We need to secure everything now." Within an hour, James and Sarah had moved all sensitive materials related to Project Phoenix to Sarah's office. Sophia, returning from her university class, quickly grasped the situation. "She's working for him, isn't she?" Sophia asked, her perceptiveness startling the adults. "We don't know that," James said, though his instincts suggested otherwise. That evening, while Sophia worked on homework in her room, James activated the small security system they'd recently installed. A discreet camera showed Rebecca Harper approaching their building 12 hours before her scheduled visit. "I knew it," Sarah whispered as they watched Rebecca skillfully pick the lock on their apartment door. On the security feed, they observed Rebecca systematically searching the apartment, photographing documents and placing what appeared to be surveillance devices in strategic locations. When she entered Sophia's room, James tensed, but she merely glanced at the sleeping child before continuing her search. "She's thorough," Sarah noted grimly. "Professional," James nodded. a plan already forming. Let's return. I want to welcome our unexpected visitor properly. Rebecca's face drained of color when she emerged from the hallway to find James calmly, seated in the living room waiting. Working late, Rebecca? He asked quietly. James, I was concerned after our conversation and decided to save it. His voice remained controlled. The cameras caught everything. Her composure crumbled instantly. He made me do it, she whispered, sinking into a chair. Blackwood has evidence that could destroy my career, documentation errors I made years ago. He threatened to expose me unless I helped him. Helped him do what, exactly? Monitor you, she admitted. At first it was just regular reports, but recently he's become obsessed with Sophia, especially after the charity dinner incident. He keeps asking about her mathematical abilities, her routines, her schoolwork. James felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. And what did you tell him? Only what anyone could observe, Rebecca insisted. But he knows you're working on something. He's convinced the girl knows something that could threaten him. James moved closer, his voice dangerously quiet. And does he understand what happens to people who threaten my daughter? Rebecca looked away. You don't understand. Victor Blackwood isn't just wealthy. He's connected. Powerful people protect him. Her eyes met James's. Do you honestly think he would allow a child from the streets to destroy his empire? From the hallway came a small voice. I'm not just a child from the streets anymore. Sophia stood in her pajamas, her expression far older than her years. I have a family now, and we're going to stop him. Rebecca looked between them, genuine, regret crossing her features. I'm sorry, I truly did support your adoption of Sophia, that wasn't fake. But everything since has been, James said flatly. Get out, and take your surveillance devices with you. After Rebecca left, James found Sophia in their workspace, already rebooting their secure systems on her laptop. We need to accelerate our timeline, she said without looking up. Blackwood knows we're onto him. James marveled at her composure. You're not afraid? Sophia finally paused, her small fingers resting on the keyboard. I lived on the streets. During Chicago winters, Dad. I learned that fear doesn't help, planning does. Her eyes, wise beyond their years, met his. So let's plan. That night they made 3 critical decisions. Relocate their operations completely to Sarah's secure office, develop contingency scenarios for various threats, and most importantly, move from defense to offense. Rebecca's betrayal changes everything, James told Sarah over their encrypted line. Blackwood now knows about Sophia's abilities in our investigation. Our only advantage is that he doesn't know exactly what we've discovered or how far we've gotten. So we use that, Sarah replied. Classic misdirection while we complete the algorithm. As James finally fell into a troubled sleep that night, Sophia's words echoed in his mind. I'm not just a child from the streets anymore. Indeed, she wasn't. She was his daughter, a mathematical prodigy and possibly the one person in the world capable of bringing down Victor Blackwood's corrupt empire. And that made her very, very dangerous to a man with everything to lose. The whine. Sound of splintering wood jolted James awake at 3:17 a.m. Years of corporate crisis management kicked in. He was out of bed, grabbing Sophia from her room, and moving toward their emergency exit before fully conscious. Dad? Sophia mumbled sleepily. Code. Phoenix, he whispered, the phrase they'd established for their evacuation protocol. Instantly, she was alert, reaching for the pre-packed backpack beside her bed. Heavy footsteps echoed through the apartment as they slipped out the service door to the building's back stairwell. James's phone vibrated with an automated security. Alert. Their front door had been breached by what the system classified as forced entry, multiple subjects. Sarah's waiting 3 blocks south, James whispered as they descended the stairs. Remember the plan? Sophia nodded, her small face solemn in the dim emergency lighting. Contingency 4. The night air hit them with bracing coldness as they emerged into the alley behind their building. James led them through a practiced route of side streets, constantly checking for pursuit. Finally, they reached the designated meeting point where Sarah's modest sedan idled, headlights off. "They found us faster than expected," Sarah said as they slid into the back seat. "The surveillance devices must have had remote activation capabilities." James nodded grimly. "Implement the separation protocol." Sarah glanced at him sharply. "Are you sure?" "We have no choice. Sophia's safety comes first." The prearranged safe house was a small apartment above a family-owned bookstore in an unassuming neighborhood. As dawn broke, James helped Sophia unpack the essentials while Sarah secured the perimeter. "How long do we need to stay separated?" Sophia asked, her voice steady despite the night's events. "Not long," James promised, though uncertainty gnawed at him. "I'll draw their attention while you and Sarah complete the algorithm. It's safer if they focus on me." Sophia's eyes, too perceptive for her age, searched his face. "You're not telling me everything," James sighed, kneeling to her level. "My blood pressure has been spiking again. The doctor warned me that another crisis could be dangerous. I need to know you're safe, especially if—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Sophia threw her arms around his neck. "You have to take your medication. Promise me." "I promise," he whispered, holding her tightly. The separation was harder than he'd anticipated. James established himself in a conspicuous downtown hotel, making calculated appearances that would draw Blackwood's surveillance away from Sophia. Meanwhile, she remained with Sarah, working tirelessly on the algorithm while continuing her education remotely. They maintained communication through an ingenious system Sophia had devised, mathematical problems posted on a forum for young prodigies that contained embedded messages decipherable only to someone with their specific shared knowledge. 2 weeks into their separation, the pressure finally broke James's tenuous health. During a meeting with a financial journalist, part of their misdirection strategy, crushing chest pain drove him to his knees. He awoke in the cardiac unit of Chicago General Hospital, monitors beeping steadily around him. His first conscious thought was of Sophia. Had their communication system been compromised by his hospitalization? Would she think he had abandoned their plan? With trembling hands, he reached for the hospital tablet, accessing the mathematics forum. There he found a new problem posted under Sophia's pseudonym, a complex equation that, when properly decoded, read, "We're safe. Algorithm at 87%. Don't worry about us. Focus on recovery." Tears pricked his eyes. Even separated, her brilliant mind remained connected to his. From his hospital bed, James observed 2 men in dark suits maintaining a discreet watch on his room. Blackwood's surveillance hadn't diminished with his health crisis. If anything, it had intensified. Good. That meant Sophia remained undetected. As days passed, James used his confinement productively, reaching out to former colleagues who had been similarly destroyed by Blackwood's schemes. By week's end, he had assembled a network of witnesses willing to testify once they had concrete evidence. In the quiet of night, when nurses made their rounds less frequently, James would decode Sophia's latest forum messages. The algorithm was approaching completion. Soon they would have irrefutable evidence of Blackwood's fraud, and the means to prevent similar schemes in the future. "Almost there, Sophia," he whispered to the darkness. "Stay safe just a little longer." Released from the hospital with strict orders to minimize stress, advice his cardiologist delivered with ironic timing, James moved forward with the next phase of their plan. 3 weeks of separation from Sophia had been necessary but painful. Their reunion, carefully orchestrated at Sarah's office after hours, was brief but emotional. "You look terrible," Sophia observed bluntly, her small hands checking his face, as if assessing a mathematical problem. "Hospital food," James replied with a weak smile, though the real culprit was constant anxiety for her safety. Sarah spread documents across her conference table. "Sophia's algorithm is complete. It's not just effective, it's revolutionary." Sophia beamed with quiet pride. "It can trace the hidden assets with 94% accuracy and identify the original fraud patterns retroactively." "Which means we can prove what happened," James said, paging through the technical specifications. But proof isn't enough. We need to force Blackwood's hand. The strategy they devised was audacious. James would return to the financial world publicly, using the cover of a consulting position at a small but respected firm. His presence would make Blackwood nervous. His actions would make him reckless. 2 days later, James entered the Chicago Financial Center for the first time since his downfall. The whispers followed him through the lobby. The ghost of a disgraced titan returned to haunt familiar hallways. He received exactly the reaction they'd anticipated. Within hours, Blackwood's surveillance team doubled. "He's watching," James confirmed that evening during their secure call. "Now let's give him something to see." The annual investment strategies conference provided the perfect stage. As a last-minute substitute speaker, James delivered a presentation on detecting algorithmic market manipulation, without specifically mentioning Blackwood, but with enough thinly veiled examples to send a clear message. Seated in the back of the ballroom, Victor Blackwood observed with an expression of calculated indifference that failed to mask his tension. When the moderator opened the floor for questions, he approached the microphone. "Fascinating theories, Reynolds," Blackwood said, his voice carrying through the hall. "But isn't this a case of sour grapes? Failed executives often blame manipulation for their own incompetence." James smiled calmly, having anticipated the confrontation. "Perhaps, but the mathematics doesn't lie. When asset devaluation follows, non-random patterns consistent with programmed interventions, coincidence becomes conspiracy." He projected a simplified version of Sophia's analysis, enough to demonstrate suspicious patterns without revealing their full discoveries. Around the room, financial experts leaned forward, recognizing the implications. Blackwood's composure slipped momentarily. "You've been busy during your sabbatical." "I've had time to examine things from a new perspective," James replied evenly. "Children often see patterns adults miss." The reference to Sophia was deliberate, a message that Blackwood alone would fully comprehend. As the session ended, Blackwood cornered James near the exit. "Whatever you think you've discovered needs to remain theoretical," he warned, his voice low. "For everyone's sake." James met his gaze steadily. "Theoretical like your concern for our investors? Or theoretical like your offshore accounts?" Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "Half," he hissed. "I'll transfer half the recoverable assets to a foundation of your choosing. No questions, no prosecution. That's a generous theoretical offer. Don't be a fool, Reynolds. You have no idea who you're really up against." Blackwood glanced around, before continuing. "I can have papers drawn up tomorrow. 50% is better than nothing, which is what you'll have if you continue this crusade." The trap was set. With Blackwood now scrambling to move assets, Sophia's algorithm perfectly tracked each transaction, capturing irrefutable evidence of both the original fraud and the current attempted cover-up. That night, in their secure communication, James relayed the confrontation. "He offered half," he explained, tried to make it sound generous. "That's approximately $4.7 billion, Sophia calculated immediately. "But it's not about the money, is it?" "No," James agreed. "It's about justice and honoring a promise I made to a little girl selling origami on a rainy day." Sophia's response came in the form of a complex equation that, when solved, revealed a simple message. "I believe in you, Dad." As James prepared for bed, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Half is generous. The alternative is devastating. Last chance." The game had entered its final dangerous phase. In the pre-dawn quiet of Sarah's office, 3 exhausted figures huddled around a conference table covered with evidence of Victor Blackwood's elaborate fraud. After weeks of separation, the complete team had reunited to prepare for what could be their final decisive move. "Let me verify I understand correctly," Sarah said, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Blackwood has offered to quietly return half the stolen assets, roughly $4.7 billion, with no prosecution, no publicity, no admission of wrongdoing." "That's the offer," James confirmed, watching Sophia as she methodically organized printouts of transaction records. Despite the late hour, her focus remained unwavering. "We could accept," Sarah pointed out pragmatically. "Take the money, establish the foundation you've discussed, help thousands of people, walk away safely." James nodded slowly. "Yes, that's an option. But it's not justice," Sophia interjected without looking up from her work. "The other half would still represent thousands of lives damaged, people who lost homes, savings, retirements." She finally raised her eyes to meet her father's. "And Blackwood would remain free to do it again." "There's also the matter of your algorithm," Sarah added. "Sophia, what you've created goes far beyond tracking Blackwood's fraud. It could fundamentally transform financial security worldwide." The room fell silent as the weight of their decisions settled around them. The offered settlement would solve their immediate problems. James and Sophia could live comfortably, fund educational initiatives, and avoid the dangerous confrontation looming before them. But the alternative, full exposure, carried risks along with its potential rewards. Blackwood's threat of devastating consequences wasn't empty rhetoric. He had powerful allies who had benefited from his schemes. Going public meant facing not just legal challenges but potentially physical danger. "I need to speak with Sophia alone," James said finally. When Sarah had stepped out, he sat beside his daughter, taking her small hands in his. "Sophia, I want you to know something important. Whatever decision we make, I am already immensely proud of what you've accomplished. Your brilliance, your courage, your moral clarity, they humble me daily." She squeezed his hands. "But you're worried about what happens if we refuse his offer." "Yes," he admitted. "Blackwood has resources we don't fully understand. The risks are real." Sophia considered this thoughtfully. "On the streets, I had to make choices every day. Where to sleep, who to trust, when to hide. The hardest lesson wasn't about survival. What was it about? Keeping who you are while surviving." Her eyes, reflecting wisdom beyond her years, held steady. Anyone can survive if they're willing to become something they're not. The real challenge is surviving with your soul intact. James felt emotion tighten his throat. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher," she replied with a small smile. "A man who could have walked past a little girl selling origami but chose to see her instead." They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, the decision crystallizing between them without further words. When Sarah returned, their path was clear. "We're going public," James announced. "Full disclosure, complete evidence, no deals." Sarah nodded, not surprised. "I figured as much, but there's something else we need to consider." She opened her laptop, displaying a complex analysis of Sophia's algorithm. This isn't just a tool for exposing Blackwood. With proper development, it could become a financial safeguard, an early warning system against similar frauds worldwide. Sophia leaned forward, excitement brightening her tired eyes. "You mean implemented as an open-source protocol for regulatory agencies?" "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "Instead of just punishing one criminal, we could protect millions of future victims." The implications were staggering. What had begun as a personal quest for justice had evolved into something with potentially global impact. Sophia's mathematical genius, born from street survival and nurtured through her bond with James, could transform the very foundation of financial security. "That would be a true legacy," James said softly. "Better than buildings with your name on them?" Sophia asked, a hint of teasing in her voice. He smiled, remembering his former obsession with emblazoning the Reynolds name across Chicago's skyline. "Infinitely better." As dawn broke over the city, they finalized their strategy. The evidence would be presented simultaneously to federal regulators, key journalists, and international financial oversight committees. Sophia's algorithm would be offered as an open-source solution, with proper safeguards to prevent its misuse. The foundation they had discussed would still be established, but with a different purpose, supporting financial literacy and providing resources for victims of fraud, particularly those without voices in the system. There's no going back once we do this, James cautioned as they prepared to leave. Blackwood will use every resource to discredit us. I know, Sophia replied calmly. But on the streets, I learned another important lesson. She zipped up her backpack full of evidence, her expression resolute. The scariest threats come from people who don't want you to realize your own power. As they walked together into the brightening day, James reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he had been a broken man, his identity shattered along with his fortune. Now, with less material, wealth but infinitely greater purpose, he faced the greatest challenge of his career alongside the greatest gift of his life, a daughter whose brilliant mind was matched only by her courageous heart. Whatever storms awaited them, they would weather them together. The Securities and Exchange Commission's Chicago office was not accustomed to receiving visits from disgraced former CEOs, accompanied by 8-year-old girls. Yet on a crisp Monday morning, that's exactly who arrived at their doorstep. We have an appointment with Director Harmon, James stated calmly to the security guard, who glanced dubiously between James's worn but dignified suit and Sophia's neat school uniform. Reynolds and Reynolds, the guard confirmed, eyebrows raised. Father and daughter, James affirmed, his hand resting protectively on Sophia's shoulder. Director Eleanor Harmon greeted them with professional courtesy masking obvious curiosity. A veteran regulator with 30 years of experience, she had investigated hundreds of financial crimes, including the initial and ultimately inconclusive review of Reynolds' financials collapse. Mr. Reynolds, I must admit your request for this meeting was unusual, she began once they were seated in her office. What we're about to share is equally unusual, James replied, nodding to Sophia, who opened her laptop. For the next 2 hours, they methodically presented their evidence: transaction records, algorithmic analyses, pattern identifications, and comprehensive timelines. Sophia explained the mathematical signatures of fraud with a clarity that left even seasoned financial investigators leaning forward in fascination. This is remarkable, Director Harmon finally said, removing her glasses to rub her eyes. If verified, this represents one of the most sophisticated financial crimes we've ever documented. It's verified, Sophia assured her confidently. The mathematical certainty is 98.7%. Simultaneously across town, Sarah Lawson presented the same evidence to the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI, while digital packages were delivered to selected journalists at major financial publications. By afternoon, the wheels of justice were unmistakably in motion. Federal agents executed search warrants at Blackwood Capital's headquarters. Trading of related securities was temporarily suspended. Victor Blackwood's name flashed across financial news tickers worldwide. James and Sophia watched the developments from the safety of a temporary location arranged by federal authorities. As predicted, Blackwood's counterattack was swift and vicious. Former Reynolds financial CEO launches desperate smear campaign, read one headline on a business news site controlled by Blackwood's media allies. Another questioned Sophia's existence, suggesting she was a PR invention designed to humanize a failed executive. They're saying I'm not real, Sophia observed, reading the articles on her tablet with analytical detachment. That's actually a fascinating strategy. James smiled despite his concern. How so? It indicates they can't attack the mathematics itself, she explained. If they could disprove our evidence, they would. Instead, they're trying to discredit the source. By evening, the story had evolved beyond Blackwood's ability to control. Financial analysts worldwide began examining the publicly released portions of Sophia's algorithm, confirming its validity. Statements from former Reynolds financial employees corroborated the timeline of suspicious activities preceding the company's collapse. Most damaging to Blackwood, international banking authorities had frozen suspicious accounts identified by Sophia's program, capturing billions in assets before they could be moved again. The following morning, James received a call from Walter Simmons, the veteran hedge fund manager who had witnessed Sophia's mathematical prowess at the charity dinner. Reynolds, what that child of yours has created goes beyond exposing Blackwood. Simmons said without preamble. This algorithm could revolutionize financial security. Half the firms on Wall Street are already analyzing the public components. What's your endgame here? It was the question they had prepared for, the crucial next step in their strategy. We're establishing the Financial Transparency Initiative, James explained. The complete algorithm will be released as a public resource with ongoing development, supported by a non-profit foundation. You could make billions patenting this technology, Simmons countered. We're not interested in profiting from it. The algorithm was created to protect people, not to enrich us. The street won't understand that logic. Then it's time for new logic, James replied simply. 3 days later, James and Sophia took their most public step yet, a carefully arranged interview with the respected financial journalist Maria Chen, conducted in their newly secured apartment. Some are calling this the most significant financial security innovation in decades, Maria began, her camera crew capturing the modest living room where complex equations still covered a whiteboard. Yet you're offering it freely to the world. Why? James looked to Sophia, encouraging her to answer. Because mathematics doesn't belong to anyone, she explained, her voice clear and confident. It's a universal language that helps us understand patterns and protect people. Keeping it private would defeat its purpose. And what would you say to those questioning whether an 8-year-old could really create such a sophisticated algorithm? Sophia smiled. I would invite them to examine the mathematics. Numbers don't care how old you are. As the interview concluded, Maria asked the question James had been expecting. Mr. Reynolds, many are curious. Who exactly created this remarkable algorithm? You've been careful not to take credit yourself. James looked at his daughter with unmistakable pride. A brilliant mind who taught me that true value isn't measured in dollars. Beyond that, we prefer to let the work speak for itself. By week's end, federal indictments were issued against Victor Blackwood and 6 associates. International financial regulators had implemented preliminary versions of Sophia's detection system, already identifying suspicious patterns in 3 unrelated cases. Most significantly, nearly 70% of the assets stolen from Reynolds Financial had been located and frozen, with legal proceedings underway to return funds to former investors and employees. That night, as Sophia completed her advanced mathematics homework at their kitchen table, James received a text message from an anonymous number. This isn't over. Reynolds. He deleted it without comment, choosing instead to focus on the remarkable child before him and the extraordinary future they were building together. 1 year later, James and Sophia stood together on the sidewalk where they had first met. The winter air carried the same chill, but everything else had changed. Hard to believe it was right here, Sophia said, looking at the spot where she had once displayed her origami creations. At 9 years old now, she stood a little taller, her posture reflecting the confidence of a child who knew she was both loved and valued. Sometimes the most important moments happen in the most ordinary places, James replied, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. Behind them rose the newly established headquarters of the Reynolds Foundation for Educational Innovation. Funded with a portion of the recovered assets from Blackwood's fraud, the foundation had already launched programs for mathematically gifted children from disadvantaged backgrounds, providing opportunities that might otherwise never have existed. Victor Blackwood was serving the first year of a 15-year sentence for securities fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. His empire had crumbled, but more importantly, the financial safeguards developed from Sophia's algorithm had been implemented in markets worldwide, already preventing 3 major fraud attempts. You could have just given me a sandwich that day and kept walking, Sophia observed as they made their way back to the foundation building. Most people would have. James smiled, remembering the broken man he had been, isolated, bitter, defined by his losses. I thought I was saving you, he said softly. I never realized you would save me. The lobby of the foundation featured a simple display case. Inside, carefully preserved, was the first origami fox Sophia had sold him, alongside a framed printout of the first line of code from her groundbreaking algorithm. Beneath them, a small plaque read, Extraordinary solutions often come from unexpected places. In Sophia's new advanced mathematics class at the university, professors who had initially been skeptical of a child prodigy now regularly sought her insight. The academic papers they were co-authoring promised to transform not just financial security, but computational approaches to pattern recognition across multiple fields. "Dad," Sophia said as they entered his office overlooking the Chicago skyline, "do you ever miss your old life? The money, the power, the buildings with your name on them?" James considered the question seriously. "I miss certain comforts," he admitted, "but not the emptiness that came with them. Not the person I was becoming." He looked at his daughter, this remarkable child who had transformed his understanding of wealth, success, and purpose. "What we're building now will help people long after we're gone," he continued. "That's a legacy worth having." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "I've been working on something new," she said, pulling a notebook from her backpack. "An extension of the algorithm that could help identify children with exceptional mathematical abilities, especially in underserved communities." As she explained her latest innovation, James marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From the depths of his failure to the heights of this new purpose, from a little girl's survival on the streets to a revolutionary mathematical mind changing the world, the true treasure they had both discovered was never in bank accounts or corporate headquarters. It was in the transformation that happens when talent meets opportunity, when purpose replaces ambition, and when two unlikely souls find in each other exactly what they need to become their best selves.